This week on Deadful Sunday, we'll be taking a look at the presidential election in the United States. At the time of recording, Joe Biden has been called as the winner, whilst the little votes left are counted. For many, his victory came as a surprise, either because he won at all or because of its margin. In many cases, Biden won by such few 0-point percentage points that could have gone either way up until the final moments. 2020, the worst year on record for many people, is drawing to a close on this knife-edge election. Considering this, and using the analysis from the Financial Times, we'll be taking a look at the demographics of voters this year. Building on that, we'll analyse what these voting demographics point to in regards to the construction and change of society, concluding with what some might label a bleak outlook for the future of mankind. Firstly, it's apparent that Trump's share of the white vote decreased. The Financial Times, FT, state that in 2016, Mr. Trump's victory largely hinged on the enthusiasm of white votes without a college degree, end quote. But with Biden making some gains in this demographic, it's resulted in a 4-point Democratic swing among non-college educated whites, end quote. Although, important to note, is that white non-college educated votes are also a diminishing share of the electorate, end quote, down 2.3% since 2016 according to the FT. However, the loss of support from low-income and older voters could explain why Trump's white vote share has diminished. The FT also points out that demography may no longer be destiny, end quote, considering that non-college educated minority voters increased their support for Mr. Trump from 20% to 25%, end quote. The conclusion drawn by the FT, therefore, is that the data also suggests that the level of education is becoming a more important divide and is clashing with racial identity as a driver of voting patterns, end quote. At this point, we can turn to our philosopher of the week, Martin Delany, who, as the father of black nationalism, called for the mass emigration of African Americans from the United States back to Africa, as a means of escaping the 19th century racialized oppression that he argued this nation within a nation, end quote, perpetually experienced. In what Tommie Shelby refers to as his strong black nationalist viewpoint, Delany presumes that all black people not only think the same way, but experience the world similarly, if not the same. Considering our outline of these voter demographics, Delany's error is that he fails to consider an intersectional approach. Turning back to the voter demographics, the demographic ground where Trump made clear gains was, according to the FT, with the rich, as now just over half of those whose family income was more than $100,000 a year supported the president, compared to 45% in 2016, end quote. What then does this intersection between education, race, and income point to? Well, elsewhere it's been argued that change relies on self-interest. Lopez, 2003, explained that whites will tolerate and advance the interests of people of colour only when they promote the self-interests of whites, end quote. Now we can adapt this quote and say that the hegemon will tolerate and advance the interests of the proletariat only when they promote the self-interests of the hegemon, end quote. By this I mean that the wealthy, the powerful, the elite will always be on their own side, will always push their own interests, will convince those that their interests harm people of colour, the non-college educated, the old, and the young, that they're on their side, that they're the only option which, if chosen, will protect them from harmful change. There's a similarity then between Trump-Pence and Biden-Harris, which is that both campaigns claim to be here to help, at least someone, claim to be on the right side of history, claim to be the bastions here to protect those in need of protection, claim to have the answers. Thus, those that have or seek power seem to be saying the same thing, but just in different ways. Can we then characterise voting, governance, power as this merry-go-round that is unchanging, as the background music which is always the same except for the vocals piercing through it? Are we then stuck in a vortex of power, unable to escape? To answer this, we should turn to Peter Kropotkin, a Russian anarchist and advocate for anarcho-communism. He says in his pamphlet Anarchist Morality, the inverterate enemies of thought, the government, the lawgiver, and the priest, soon recover from their defeat. By degrees they gather together their scattered forces and remodel their faith and their code of laws to adapt them to new needs. Then, profiting by the civility of thought and of character, which they themselves have so effectually cultivated, profiting too by the momentary disorganisation of society, taking advantage of the laziness of some, the greed of others, the best hopes of many, they softly creep back to their work by first of all taking possession of childhood through education." End quote. Considering this, and the question we ask about whether or not we're inescapably stuck in this vortex of power, Kropotkin would say no. In fact, in the same pamphlet, he offers something we may use in the way of an answer. Be strong on the one hand, and once you have seen unrighteousness and recognised it as such, inequity in life, a lie in science, or suffering inflicted by another, rise in revolt against the iniquity, the lie, or the injustice. Struggle. To struggle is to live, and the fiercer the struggle, the intenser the life. Then you will have lived, and a few such hours of life are worth years spent vegetating." End quote. In short, we may settle this time. We may accept that some devils are better than others. We may concede that to be ruled with a velveted iron fist feels less harmful than the bare, brutish metallic punch of a tangerine oppressor. But this is not our only option. This is not our only choice. The world does not have to be organised in this manner. We can forge another path, and another way. This new path will not, however, be begun with a concession. This marks the end of the 9th episode of DeadPhilSundays. We hope you enjoyed it, and that we'll see you next week.